It's Dr. Bob again. This time I'm coming to you from the Aztec ruins in Aztec, New Mexico, right next to Farmington, New Mexico. It's an unfortunate name because these ruins, of course, are not Aztec, and actually, if you were to listen to the descendants of the people who built this, they're not ruins either. But we call them the Aztec ruins because that name is just kind of stuck from the Spanish. But they actually were built by the Puebloan people. The Puebloan people are the ancestors of the modern Hopi and Zuni and other tribes. This site, they estimate that it was built between 1100 and 1350 or so AD, and was built by the Puebloans, the same people who built Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and other locations here in the Southwest. It's an interesting opportunity for us as we look at this building. We're standing inside the Great Kiva, which is interpreted to be a meeting place for the community, where they would gather. There's a seat that goes all around the exterior. There are these two massive containers, areas that look like they could have held any kind of material, water or anything, as well as an area that's lined to be used as a fire pit. As we look at this site, it's a great opportunity for us to realize that it's being evaluated through the viewpoint, through the worldview of evolution. We tend to think of evolution primarily as a biological theory and process that that we tend to look at evolution as a biological theory, but unfortunately it has also intruded all of the other areas of study and science, including anthropology and sociology, archaeology. So when we look at this site, it's interesting as you read the evaluations and the studies that have been done on it. They're always done through the viewpoint of the evolutionary ideas. And how would that apply here? Well, that ancient people, the people who built it, must have been more primitive than us. The people in the past were not as advanced as us. Darwin's ideas carry through way beyond biology and into this idea of identity and sociology and here archaeology and anthropology. So always the interpretations are colored with this idea of primitive men, primitive people. If instead we look at it from a biblical point of view and we realize that these were the people who were dispersed after the Tower of Babel, in the period after the flood, they find themselves here in this remote area where there is water, there is food, but there are not many other materials, and so they build with what they have. This is built primarily with stone, mud brick, wood that had to be carted sometimes from 70 miles away, these great aspen beams in the ceiling. But the people were able to, in a community manner and in a cooperative way, were able to build these great structures. We talk about hunter-gatherers and then city builders. Well, here what you have is a group of people who were farming corn, were hunting, but also were living in families and as groups, just as we see in the Bible. We go back to the early pages of the Bible where we see Adam and Eve, all the way through to the last pages of Revelation. What we have is a history of people, not of primitive people or less advanced people, but people living in a variety of different circumstances. So here in the Aztec ruins, what we see is this great history of these people in difficult circumstances, difficult situations, building amazing structures. Some of these have stone walls on the exterior and the interior with a gap in between them that is then filled with rubble to provide the insulation from the heat in the summer and the cold in the winter. This building itself, this Great Kiva, half of it is actually below ground level to provide the same feature. It's interesting if we allow ourselves to then evaluate structures such as this outside of that evolutionary paradigm. How would then we look at these features? We see these great pits that have been lined in the ground. As we came through, my wife commented that, well, this looks like it could be a synagogue. Here are these great basins that look like they could be mikvahs, and you've got areas where people could sit around, and you've got platforms where you could have a teacher. So whether this had that kind of influence or not, the fact is that we need to look at these structures and look at the things that were left by the people who come before us, look at them in terms of people, advanced people, people who knew God, people who may have strayed and may have introduced other worldly religious systems, but the origin of all people is a belief in God. These other ideas of other gods and everything else, of course, find themselves or work themselves into ancient cultures, as they do in modern cultures. But we should stop looking at seeing primitive men and the evolutionary ideas carried through to anthropology and our archaeology and our understanding of ourselves. It's not simply a matter that we consider these people to be primitive people in comparison to ourselves. That's how we then see ourselves. We see ourselves as less advanced than those who will come after us, instead of seeing ourselves as God describes us, as creatures that were built in His image, the only ones built in His image, that we were made by God in His image, and that gives us an intellect and an ability and a destiny that is different than any other creation. So when we look at things like Aztec ruins, it is a lot more exciting to look at this as being remnants of the advanced, capable intellect of people that were created by God, living in difficult circumstances, but building rich communities in spite of the circumstances they were in. And so we see this amazing structure. These buildings are aligned with the path of the sun through the summer solstice. So they demonstrate a great advanced knowledge of astronomy. That's a field called archaeoastronomy, and we're finding it in ruins all over the world, that these people were not primitive in their understanding of how the cosmos worked. The ancient legends that these cultures tell of creation and of the flood carry those remnants of their ancestors from the time of the flood and from the time of the tower and from even the time of Eden into their culture, in spite of the absence of Scripture, in spite of the absence of a Bible for them to turn to. So they carried on as best they could with the knowledge that was passed to them from generation to generation. We have the opportunity to, as we look at the Bible and we look at these records, to gain this first-hand account from someone who was there and witnessed it. And so as the benefactors of that history, of those scriptural record accounts that were given to us from God through His prophets, we are able to then look at this information and look at these great structures and see them in a whole different light than the non-biblical worldview does. Non-biblical worldview sees this as these poor primitive people. Man, how did they manage to do this? Instead of seeing them as amazing creations of God, built in His image, doing exactly what God had given us to do, and that was to subdue the earth and to care for our families and to teach our children. And these represent that. And if we then interpret them through the biblical worldview, I think we come to a very different conclusion. So it's an exciting day to be in a place like this, and also an interesting one that will require a lot of thought by a lot of people to look at it and say, if we interpret this through that biblical worldview, how does that differ from the anti-God, non-biblical worldview of those who occupy these sciences predominantly in the world today? So it's great to be here and to look at this and to think it's okay to believe, and we should allow that to inform all of our study and all of our observations and all of these adventures that we're on as we go through life. And so once again, it's Dr. Bob. I'm here at the Aztec ruins, enjoying the reminder that God created us in His image, and that once again we are amazing, amazing creations with unbelievable capabilities, even in the most difficult circumstances. So once again, Dr. Bob, and I'll see you again next time.